people, but giving you solid stuff. I'm trying to give you my best and then get from you your best. And so that's my motivation purely, is to share this, and especially to share it with the younger generation. But do not, if you're my age or a little younger, few of you might be older. I don't know. I'm 82. I don't know. So don't think I'm excluding anyone who isn't young. I'm concerned about everybody, but it's especially the youth because they're the future, you know? So global reach looks pretty good. And, we can reach out and even get more. Now, as I said, my primary reason is for intergenerational dialogue for doing this show. And you're going to see young people involved in the show more. We've had some, but we're going to have many more involved in this show. And the issues that we've been addressing addresses the issues of all of our people, but especially the younger generation. This whole point of the choice between two cultures, it affects all of us. But what's hit our community since '68, globally and in the United States, especially affects our youth. And they have been put in a technological, economic, social, political, police bind, racist bind that is very difficult. And they're doing quite well with it, but they need help. And so this choice between two cultures, I don't know if you get it, but that came from God. That one has got no holes in it. And most people don't get this when I say it came from God. Oh, yeah, you had a dream. There's a thing called theory. That's a guess. I don't do theory. It's a guess. And I don't have air. So I went through astrology. Some of you real conscious people tuned out because you've been brainwashed. You go to psychology, which is, they didn't have no psychology in Egypt. Did you know that? There was no such thing as a psychiatrist or a psychologist. You know why? The society wasn't sick, so you didn't have a lot of sick people. I'm talking psychologically sick, And then you got the theoreticians of sickness. Freud, blame everything on the mama. And Freud was good. He really psychoanalyzed white people, but he took spirit out. That's why Dr. Wade Nobles, we joke, but Wade's serious about it. Wade don't really call himself a psychologist anymore. Why? He's in the spirit. You know what I mean? His Babalawo, who's mine, Ifeyemi, I'm gonna have him on this show probably next year. I did some things before with him. I did a show with him. I'll probably post it on this channel as well. These Babalawos, they have a cure rate for what's called mental illness. Why? Because spirit is brought into the dimension. But a lot of you, I know a lot of you do understand this and a lot of you don't. Astrology, baby, is not something to dismiss. And I did a series of shows on that. And I noticed that some of my most serious viewers didn't watch that one. And they were mostly males, but maybe some females too. And they owned up to it. A few of them did. Some of my most serious ones. Because that Catholic church, you ain't a Catholic, but that's what affected Christianity. You know what I mean? So all I'm saying is they didn't have no psychologists in Kemet. Now, don't get me wrong. We need some now because we have been affected by certain things that throw us off balance. And at the very least, I know that some people need medication. It doesn't cure you, but it stabilizes you, keeps you from acting on some of those fantasies. So I know that. But there's a cure rate in some of these spirit systems. I don't claim to have them. I don't. But when I say my vision came from God, that means, because I've only seen the light a couple of times. Those answers have no error in it. And I'm not going around saying I was smart enough to come up with this. So a choice between two cultures, which this show will be helping to address on another level, is describing the bind that the youth are in and our communities in, where the forces that have hit us have put us in a position where some of us are stepping out of our culture like never before. You hear me? So I've gone through this before. So That's real key in terms of the intergenerational piece, is that we're trying to offer something for the youth to understand their situation better because they're already dealing with it. I'm not claiming that I got all the answers. I mean, this is a generation that's waking up, and you all put Trump out of the White House. That's a big achievement. It was mainly a youth achievement, you know. The George Floyd, Breonna Taylor caption Black Lives Matter movement. You know what I mean? Largely youth. Big achievement. Coming of age for the young generation. So, what does the demographics or the analytics say about age? This is very important to me. And this was the happiest find of all. Out of 166,905 viewers, I want you to hear this one. 68.2% of the viewers range from 13 years of age to 44. Listen to this. Let me repeat that one. Out of 166,905 viewers over the whole year, 68.2% of the viewers are in the age group of 13 to 44. Hey, 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 hey. That is a key. Do you hear me? And 13, gone. 13-year-olds, keep on watching. Quit telling me that people got short attention spans. Some of these young people will listen longer than some of us and some of them less, but they listening. Hey, and then 31.90% of the viewers are between 45 and 65 years of age. 65 plus years of age. I mean, it could be over 65. So that's 31.90%. That's a nice little spread. So we got an intergenerational audience heavily weighted towards the young, but also a significant number of elders who bring in the wisdom. And I'm getting a lot because when I look at some of these Facebook pages, for example, you go into some of these like the Mosley clan, for example, they got some reading stuff that is just out of sight. Some stuff I haven't seen. You hear me? And Lady Mosley, she's bad freedom fighters. I know her man is. You know what I mean? So they give me an education on a lot of different levels, and that is all one of the things that this show wants to share or serve is activists, people who are involved in organizations as well as individuals, families, a host of things. So that's also good. But that age spread, 68.2%, 13 to 44 years of age, 31.90% of viewers 45 to 65 plus. So a basis for intergenerational discussions. Now, the area where I think that we're going to need improvement is gender, though I'll go into these numbers in a minute in terms of the male-female viewing audience. So I checked out the analytics on each show, and I don't have time to go into those, but overall, there's pretty good gender balance, but there are some shows that have more males than females and probably more of those. But there's a real problem with the analytics. And there are probably other problems that I don't know because I'm not an expert in this analytics stuff. But what I can see, one of the big problems is that there are a significant number of shows that have generated 1,000 views or more, or 600 or 700, and sometimes even way over that. And there's no analytics on gender. And then they'll give the explanation is not a sufficient number to base, an analysis on, which is pure bull because it's a lot of people, and we'll probably look at this closer to see if there's any themes that these shows that don't get the gender analysis seem to be stressing. So what I'm saying is, when I give the gender ratio, one of the things to be clear is the data is far from complete, and that is, inexcusable if you are being thorough. But obviously, there's reasons why certain shows are getting more attention than others, and it's going to take an analysis of all these shows to figure out the patterns. But I've got an idea, but I'm not going to say until I'm sure. So I just took 2 shows for samples of gender response. One was a speech that I delivered in Memphis, Tennessee, 1995, when my book, Return to the African Mother Principle, came out. Was at Greater Amani Church. Reverend Bill Atkins, who's a historian and head of that church at that time had 15,000 members. And it was a speech that I gave before the nationalist community. He brought in 200 to 300 people, and Kwame Ture was in the audience. And if you haven't seen that, you should go watch it. It's called Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And that's the most important book and the most important work I've done, period, because that comes from the big light, God's beautiful light. And that's the key to just societies. And I have not explored that yet. I want to build a bigger platform before I do it, And it's the hardest thing I did. I've said before, whipping the Bank of America, the biggest bank in the world, that took 6 months. That was hard. Writing Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, it was the hardest thing I ever did, the most enjoyable thing I ever did. And it took 14 disciplines to master. And I don't master 14 disciplines, so I drew on different people and different sources. I had to do that because God's mind is whole. It's not like a theory, one point. It's all interconnected. And up underneath this is the basis for just societies. It's the most precious jewel you can get. And this has to be pushed a whole lot more. But so this presentation was on that subject. And one of my favorite pictures is me talking to Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael. You should look at that. And it's one of the leaflets that we use to promote this show. It's a treasured picture. He was a good friend of mine. I led the Black Nationalist Wing in CORE. He led the Black Power Wing, the Black Nationalist Wing, in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I would have him at my home. We put security on him when we have him to come out and speak, whatever. And his organization was at least a part of the formation of the National Black United Front, which I'm one of the founders of, but G2 Weusi was the architect. He's passed on, one of my good friends, born the same year as me, in 1939, October 25th, 1939. So taking this as a sample of gender response to a topic that's dealing with male-female equality, according to the analytics coming from YouTube, 40.5% of the audience was female, 59.5% was male. So that's interesting, because that one is paying equal attention to the role of males and females in constructing just societies, and its very basis for it, the balance between them, and the synthesis of the masculine feminine level. So, but that's showing you a greater inclination towards males than females, and watching that. So what's the reason for that? We need to explore it. But it's not a bad ratio, but it's not the ratio I want. I want more balance. Then there was another presentation called We Are Gods, We Are Humans with the Light of God Within. That generated over 6,011 views, and it had a huge global spread, India, Africa, Caribbean. And so the gender spread there is interesting. 52.2% females and 47.8% males. So that one showed greater interest coming from the females. And you might say, well, yeah, it's spirituality. But then the shows that we did on astrology, some of those were pretty equal in terms of male and female. So that was interesting. But what's interesting about this God Within is that the average view time for females was 40 minutes. Now, this is really something here because very often this flips which sex watches longer, you know. The average view time for males was 1 hour and 9 minutes. That's average. So that's pretty good. But at the same time, we have the reverse on a lot of these shows where it's the sisters watching longer. And what my best friend, Kendi Solowazi, he's really insightful. You're going to see him on this show. That's the picture you see with the people doing the bump in the back. That was a birthday present from him. You know, it's a beautiful brother. He said, well, brother, you know why the sisters are watching longer? I said, why? He said, they're smarter. I said, yeah, you got that right. Brothers, you may not want to hear that, but that's a fact. And by the way, Lasonda Henderson, glad to have you on. INBA, National Black United Front, right on. Young sister here, you know what I mean? Right on. Hey, one of my favorite organizations. So, so looking at the data on gender spread out, 166,905 viewers, the gender spread was 65.5% male, 34.5% female. Noting that their data isn't complete, it's probably not as bad, but it still tells us that there's a disparity and we can do better. And what it's saying is that we need to probably have more shows that sisters find important to them. After all, I am a brother. I'm trying to do my best, but we need input from sisters to give us more ideas on things we can do that address their issues and needs. And we definitely need more presenters who are sisters and, you know, just give us your input. And by the way, what I'm asking is that people on this chat, if you want to, you can put down what you'd like to see as topics for the show, but it would even be better to go to the show itself when the show's off. When you're finished, go to the comments. It would be better to put your comments there because it's harder to get to these comments once you're offline because you have to really come back to the show and then get into the time period in which each person makes a comment. So it would be better if you would put your comments for what you'd like to see as topics for the show underneath this show, you know, when you finish watching it. Put your comments there, you know. Any things that you see as topics or ways to improve the show. I know a number of people have requested PowerPoint, and I need to get into that. And there's some other things that I want to do to improve the way the show is presented. And so give us your comments. I'm an organizer, and this is key in organizing. Going people find out what people want. And so even though I'm doing stuff that I'm interested in, I think people are interested in it, but I need to know what you're interested in. And so we can begin to build that into the show. So that's kind of it, you know. That's kind of the overview on, you know, what this show has been doing, and what we want to do is do better. And so we'll be plotting and planning for this next year. And so we're just at this point of starting that. So give us your input. Now, for the topic for this show today, of course, I could have just done the show on this and ended, but I ain't doing that. You know what I mean? Y'all come from more than just some data on what the show's been doing. So this show, like all the shows, is my way as one person who's a part of the Black freedom movement, Black power, Pan-Africanist, Afrocentric generation, presenting and sharing um, our insights with the hip hop millennial, and for Africa, the youth generation that's finding its voice and has found it quite well, politically and in other ways, culturally and other ways. And so this is sharing, and this particular sharing is extremely important because this sharing is dealing with the most important gain, the most valuable gain that we made in the 60s. And it's one that's often overlooked. I've said it a few times before, but it needs repeating. Um, the most important gain that was made by Blacks in the 60s, and I'm going to qualify this in a minute by what I mean by that, was the freedom of the mind. It's the freedom of the mind and the spirit. Now, I do not mean by saying this that all Africans or Blacks in the 60s freed their minds. You know that's not the case. Not all Blacks were engaged in the struggle. Only a minority were, a significant number, but nowhere near all of our people. So I'm not saying that all of our people freed our minds, because if we did, we'd be in much better shape right now. What I am saying is that the greatest achievement of the 60s was the freeing of Black minds by those that underwent a transformational process. Now, on the surface, sometimes it was a freedom from fear or a greater sense of pride, a greater sense of asserting yourself. You know what I mean? And that was a monumental achievement. So, movements that challenge systems build up people's self-confidence. That's a big achievement. But when we're talking about the freedom of the mind, we're also talking about a transformational process. And when I'm talking about the greatest gain of the 60s, it was made by those who underwent a transformational process of stages and degrees, because everyone didn't go through the whole depth. But it was the depth of transformation that really measured the degree of mental freedom and spiritual freedom that was achieved. The reason why everyone didn't go through this is, one, it was difficult. Two, it required self-discipline. And three, it required introspection, looking at yourself, not just outwardly at changing a system, but changing yourself. And I said many times on this show that our ability to change society is measured by our ability to change ourselves, because the transformation of society is reflected in what we're able to see and the agendas we're able to lay out for change, but it's got to come from within. That's not a Western view. The Western view, it's all the material system that is changing the economy, changing the political system. Those are important. But if you don't do the changes inside yourself, you won't even be able to conceive what those changes should be, let alone make them work. So this journey was a difficult journey, this transformational journey. Not all our people were engaged in movements for change. Not now, not then. Others who were started the journey and stumbled. And I'm talking about either the political journey, definitely the psychological identity journey of transformation. Some started off, they hit some books, they knew something about themselves, and they stumbled. Sometimes the pit was drug addiction. Sometimes the pit was the internal insecurities that we have as a people and individuals have, because we're human, And so it took them off course. Some people, the stumbling was stumbling into the system and they became fully absorbed and satisfied. They thought they were free. They got a job. That was it. You know what I mean? That was the end of it. So there were many stumbling blocks. They were both internal and external. I mean, the system posed their own stumbling blocks, counterintelligence program, you know, a host of other things that came out and attacked the movement. So it wasn't just us, you know. Some people were terminated or locked up for so long that they were taken out of struggle, though some like Geronimo Pratt came back stronger, you know. I mean, beautiful brother, came back stronger. So this journey to awakening wasn't easy. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks that Africans in the US face was the ghost of slavery inside of us. And for Africa, the ghost of colonialism inside of us. And so a part of the success on this journey would be, to what degree were we able to throw out, to, cough up these internal inbred sicknesses, you might call them, illnesses that come out of slavery and colonialism. So that was a key part in the journey. So this was kind of like spiritual cleansing. It's kind of like if you're in a haunted house, you know what I mean? You've got to cleanse the spirits out. It's kind of like our spirit house had some haunting that we had to get rid of. But the haunting should not be overestimated, because we also carried within us the spirit of our ancestors. We carried within us a great culture. Some of us weren't even conscious of it. Some of us still aren't, but it helped carry us through. Because as Amilcar Cabral, who you see over here, he said the liberation movement's an act of culture. And he said, and I've said this before, he said, most movements are not conscious of how they are expressions of culture. Most are to an extent, but most are not. The Chinese and their liberation struggle, they were, really expressing some form of emperorism. They've just installed the head of China into this probably lifelong position that Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping occupied, because China has embedded in it since 221 BC this idea of the emperor. So there's a, repetition of that. There's a cultural repetition of that. And so with us, we have carried inside of us in a gene pool 144,000 years of history, going up against 400 or so of oppression, 249 of enslavement. And we often focus on just the enslavement and, the damage they did and this. Yeah, it was terrible. But guess what? We came out of this with our humanity intact. I was going through Naim Akbar's book. I think it's his best work, Breaking the Psychological Chains of Slavery. I'm going to have him on this show. I know Naim, brilliant brother. And one of the conclusions he reaches about the ghost of slavery that we had to overcome was that we came out of slavery pretty normal. You know what I mean? I would say we came out of slavery at a higher level of humanity than the people who enslaved us. It shouldn't be hard, but that ain't the point. The point is, the people who carried out one of the most inhuman, savage systems conceived by humanity, they were the ones who were engaged in savagery, and we're often being compared to them. So being able to come out higher than them ain't that hard, because that was savagery. And so quit talking about they dehumanized us. They put us under dehumanized conditions. But as Black people often say, just because I'm in the mud doesn't mean I'm mud. You hear me? And the awakening of our people was this capacity to transcend circumstances. And so, as Amilcar Cabral has also said, the greatest enemy that a people face in a struggle for liberation are our internal weaknesses. And it's the internal weaknesses that we always have to struggle against and overcome. And so the sixfold stages to mental freedom is an ultimate healing system. But get this straight. I'm not saying it's a healer for schizophrenia. I'm not saying it's a healer for bipolar. I ain't saying that. No, you're going to need some help on that one. But the key thing is, it is the ultimate healer for that. You hear me? Drug addiction. Yeah, there's a lot of things you need to be taken through. But the fact of the matter is that when you undergo the transformational process where you deeply love yourself, chances are you won't have to go to Alcoholics Anonymous for the rest of your life. And I don't knock people who do that, because that's better than being an alcoholic. But if you really get in and deal with the spirit that took you there to live your life in a bottle, then chances are the healing process will take care of you. And the proof of the pie is in, if you look at Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, they were able, when they took people through that healing process, that pretty well took care of them, because they gave them something to put in place of that, which is love of self, knowledge of self, respect of self. So this sixfold stages to mental and spiritual freedom is ultimate healing, and I'm a walking testimony to it, but I'm just one. You know what I mean? You can't call mine empirical evidence. I'm just one, but I'm going to tell you, I know without this, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. You know what I mean? I'll go back into that later. So before going into the external ghost that we need to expel, and they're not all from slavery either, I want to share one of the main reasons that the sixfold stages freedom system is so powerful and curative. This is a real key thing. The systems of colonialism in Africa, where the Europeans come in and take over your country, generally with force and violence, and then rule you, or the system called neo-colonialism, where Malcolm called it dollarism, where they're ruling you economically. You have independent countries, but they're being ruled by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and whatever corporations want. They want to take all your wealth, and they come in and call it structural adjustment. They should have called it structural lynching. We know better how to manage your gold than you do. Yeah, you sure do. Take it all. Huh? I was driving with the taxi driver in Ghana a number of years ago, and he's telling me that the gold mines there, the British have them. And I said, independent Ghana, what the holy hell is that about? He said, well, they know how to better handle it. I said, yeah, they know how to better take it. You know what I mean? That's about all they're going to do. You know what I mean? And bleed it. You know what I mean? We ran Ghana for over 1,000 years, and the kings didn't rule the gold trade. In fact, they didn't know where the gold was. They just had control over the big pieces of gold that, the king got. And then the rest, the gold dust, was in the hands of the people, and they traded it for whatever they wanted to trade it for. Africans know how to handle their own resources. Who allows somebody else to loot their resources? You going to let somebody else go into your bank account? You know what I mean? You might not have much in it. You might have quite a bit in it. But you're the best one to manage your stuff. You work for it. You hear me? So the neo-colonialism, which is the economic control, indirect control, you appear to be in charge, but you aren't. The people who got the money are doing what's funny. In Glasgow, you just saw how that was. There were more coal industry people there than there were representatives of governments. And you saw in their final accord, there is Nothing on there saying that you need to stop the production of coal. You need to end it. They came up with some legalese, and that is one of the main polluters of the planet. And you're almost at the dead end game, where you will have passed the point where this planet can be livable for humans and other life forces soon. So this is all a part of the imposition of oppression, in this case caused by corporations that bleed the planet. And so when we're looking at the external ghosts that we need to expel, and we're looking at the main reason why the sixfold stages for freedom is so powerful and curative, then what we need to understand is that on the one hand, it was a brutal system of slavery or colonialism that was imposed by force, and then by false teachings. That is, the white man is superior, confusing their power with superiority. There are no superior, inferior human beings. That's a pure myth. And power as a basis for anything is an illusion, because power rises and falls. Nations rise and fall, And so are you superior when you rise and inferior when you fall? No, it's the nature of power. Just like you live and die, cycles. Baby, that's what happens there. So don't confuse gunpowder with superiority or nuclear weapons. So this imposition of slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and now what I call semi-colonialism, which is what we face, which is elements of colonialism, but it's not correct to call this colonialism, because you need continuous land where Blacks are occupying a continuous land mass, and you need to have the potential where, when you move for freedom, you have the ability to move to independence, where you can form a nation state. We're a nation within a nation because of our common culture. But a state, we are not, and the potential for that, it ain't happening. So it's not realistic to even assume that. But we have semi-colonialism. What does that mean? One nation oppressing another. The occupation of our communities by the police, who are out to instill fear in us. And then, when we get one little victory, it takes the whole world to put a cop in prison for, standing on the neck of a Black man. And we consider that a victory. And he gets 20 plus years. And there's some indication now they may overturn that verdict because of some other decisions they made. They may not. But the point is, that was nice, but it took the whole world to get that. You hear me? Because the police are an occupying army in our community. They're put there for that purpose, to ride terror on you for control. You hear me? That's their purpose. So the ghost of slavery that we need to expel were brought in through force, through violence, and then through false teachings of white supremacy. Y'all know I don't use the term white supremacy. They ain't supreme no more, baby. And they never were. They had power, but supremacy, that assumes something else. That's their term. Why don't you call it white savagery? Or, as my former student, Kuti Chagalia, who's been on a couple of shows, one fine sister too. She's a part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and a bad sister. And then she got two twins that look just like her. She met her husband in an African philosophy class that I taught. You know what I mean? Bad sister. She calls it psychopathy or sickness. She has a term for it. A lot of whites feel good about this, white supremacy. Oh, it means we're in charge. We're supreme. Oh, yes. We want to restore that. You know what I mean? I'll label them something else. And they're not supreme in the world. They're in decline. You hear me? We're in decline. They are in decline throughout the world. But the key point is the imposition of these ghosts instill false beliefs of inferiority, and often leading people who are oppressed to think their way out is to imitate the people who oppress them. So part of the sixfold stages to mental freedom is coughing that up. And the key thing to get straight is about the sixfold stages to mental freedom is it is very much tied to power. Putting a people to sleep to any degree that you put them to sleep is an act of power, of intimidation. We've never really been asleep, but to the extent that we haven't been fully aware, fully conscious, and certainly powerful because of being overpowered. So it's an act of power over you. And so that's what colonialism, neo-colonialism, and semi-colonialism is able to achieve through power. And so what happens with the sixfold stages to mental freedom, it is a byproduct of a system, a movement that is struggling for power. In Africa, for independence. In the United States, against Southern-style political apartheid. In the North, against economic apartheid and police violence and other forms of oppression. And so it is out of the struggles, the battles against these systems, that in the South were successful in terms of overturning legal segregation and the denial of the right to vote. And that has sent the right wing into a tailspin because they feel dispossessed. That's part of what Trump stuff is on the election was stolen. It really means that we shouldn't have been voting, and the black vote is just illegal automatically. And that's basically what they're trying to do now. They're doing now to a variety of states, stripping blacks of the right to vote, and some young people, some people of color, so that they can stack the decks enough so that if it's not an overwhelming number of votes in your favor, they can take it. And that's basically what they're doing. But they also have underneath this a sense of dispossession coming from defeat rendered on their behinds in the 60s and 70s. Go look at my presentation that I did on the Civil War, Black Power, and how blacks won the Civil War, and then going through Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, laying out prescriptions for how Trump would be defeated before he was. Go look at that and then do your own study, and some of you already have. So when we look at the sixfold stages for mental freedom, it comes out of battles, and it is most effective where those battles were successful. But even where they weren't, it was our force going up against theirs. And in the course of that, while we were attacking economic issues, political issues, issues of violence, in this case coming from the police to the Black Panther Party, now Black Lives Matter, through the Montgomery bus boycott, through King's Operation Confrontation in Birmingham, through the Selma to Montgomery March, and the only Northern movement that was successful, the San Francisco Freedom Movement, that addressed effectively economic apartheid and defeated an entire economic power structure on the issue of jobs. It's not just the systems we were going up against. It was a transformation of consciousness that occurred as a result of those struggles. And it's out of that that flows what's called the sixfold stages to mental freedom. And here's the deal. We didn't have any books to draw from on this because there was no book on this. Because it couldn't be. Because power relationships in the world had to change before we could undergo this experience. Because while we had rebellions in slavery, and we had some powerful movements like the Garvey movement, and there was some real transformations that occurred there, the power relationships in the world were such that they worked against us. And so these movements could only go so far. But what happens in the 60s is the power relationships have shifted. The West has fallen as a power. America was on a rise in 45 and went into decline in 72. 27 years, America experienced supremacy of global power, and now it's in decline. That's the most rapid decline of any imperial power, major imperial power in the history of the world. And it was done in part because of stupidity. They engaged in wars they couldn't win, didn't know their enemy, Vietnam, Korea. They lost in North Korea, by the way, Iraq and Afghanistan. But in part, they were going up against the high tide of power shifts in the world. And that gave us maneuvering room in this country. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to launch the kind of movements that we launched, starting in the roughest place to launch a movement, which was in the southern part of the United States, where you just get lynched for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. True, you can get shot by the police anytime, anywhere. But in the South, that was just standard stuff. And our people showed great courage and great creativity in the way they handled that. Jiu-jitsu moves that they made to produce victories. So we didn't have a book for the sixfold stages to mental freedom that would lay out, well, what are these stages? And you follow stage 1, stage 2. Why? Because the transformational process that leads to this freedom of the spirit and the freedom of the mind was one that came out of battle. It came out of conflict on the African continent between the forces supporting colonialism and those who were opposed. Whether it was Algeria, whether it was the struggle in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, but particularly Guinea-Bissau, whether it was the struggles in South Africa, Southwest Africa, Mozambique, Angola, those were the armed struggles, or whether it was the peaceful independence movements in Africa, and then the struggles here. So it took these battles against apartheid in the South and economic apartheid in the North and colonialism in Africa. It took blood, it took sweat, it took courage, it took study, and it took introspection. And all of these things were the basis for transformation. And those of us who were undergoing change, we didn't know what the cycle was. Here's the rule in struggle: follow the truth. But now we have clues of the pattern. So when you have a pattern and you know the pattern, and if you know the full cycle, then use it. And if you can, raise it to a higher level. But I think that those of us that were able to undergo real transformation, the key was we're following the truth. And we went wherever the truth led us. And to me, that's the most beautiful thing in life. Ultimately, the most beautiful truth is God. You see the light of God, that's the most beautiful light. And it's whole, and it's liberating. This whole thing of you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Well, it's true. You know what I mean? If you use it. So the path followed by an Amilcar Cabral to free his mind and try to free the mind of the cadres around him through his African study group in Portugal and the anti-colonial battle that they waged in Guinea-Bissau, the path that he followed for the freedom of his mind and spirit was the same path that Malcolm followed, that Sister Assata Shakur followed, that I followed, that a number of people whose names we don't know followed. And that was where the real reward came from. Because those that followed that path, they were able to enter on a journey where their transformation could take them to realms much higher than the enemy that they were fighting. And the greater the transformation, the deeper the transformation, then the more creative you could get. You hear me? And I should say King underwent that transformation. King did. And that was one of the real reasons for his greatness. He didn't get frozen at 65. 1965, we had voter rights, he had the ending of segregation, he could have gone and retired. That's what a lot of people did. They went and got a job, they were satisfied. He could go to preaching. No, he saw that in his success, there was a great failure. The success was, yeah, we got the right to vote. We've got the ending of legal segregation. But he said that didn't cost the system anything. He's talking financially. And you saw the show that we did on King the Revolutionary, and in there, King concluded that now the struggle had moved from civil rights to human rights. Well, that was transformation on his part. Malcolm reached the same conclusion. King's was more practical because King was defining it in terms of what it meant concretely on the ground. What it meant was ending poverty. Now, Malcolm was also concerned about that, but King saw it in a more practical light because he had been engaged in that battle longer. Malcolm is a spokesman for the nation. He's now out, and now he's getting involved, and he is calling for the same thing. King supported Malcolm's move to bring the U.S. before the United Nations World Court international bodies, charging them with human rights. He supported that. Though they only met once, they didn't talk directly, but they exchanged messages through King's attorney, who also knew Malcolm. So that was a process of transformation. King learned from the struggle, as Malcolm did, as many of us did, as Assata Shakur did. And she's one of the great ones, So the battlefield was like the classroom. And then when we had time, we could hit books. And the teachers were your enemy and your people, past and present. So the concrete conditions in Africa and in the United States, when it came to the battles against colonialism and apartheid in this country, they weren't exactly the same because Africa was struggling for independence from colonialism. We were struggling to get certain monkeys off our back, which was new slavery imposed with the first post-Reconstruction. But the requirement for success was the same. And that requirement was that if we're going to be able to take our people in Africa to the higher level of real freedom and real independence, then the colonial mentality had to be coughed up. And if we're going to produce some real freedom that provided the basis for some power for us to really address the bigger issues that King started to address, which is the restructuring of this society from unjust to just, then we're going to have to cough up those things that prevent us from even seeing it. Because a lot of us, we don't even know, well, where are we going with this? We're African-centered. Take the best of Africa, which is inside of you, that's inside the culture of our people, and use it to transform this reality, starting with yourself, which is what this Free the Mind process is, but changing society. The show I did last week on African-American culture, the spiritual blues, and Ma'at, and showing how you fuse those to change the environment, to save the planet. Native Americans would do the same thing with their culture because they are keepers and preservers of nature. They have a real vision and life experience and a culture that's about doing that. And so that was to show how strong your culture is and how it's going to take more than mechanics to fix this environment. It's going to take a transformation. And in this case, a philosophy that sees that Mother Earth is a living organism and needs to be treated with respect, not just observed, and certainly not for the purpose of control, but to commune with, as George Washington Carver did. So the liberation movement is an act of culture on many levels. And in this particular case, it's one that when we free our minds, we can help free the planet. Since it's a mad philosophy of science that has put nature in the predicament that it's in, particularly corporate capitalism that has polluted everything. treated everything like it's a cesspool in the name of one thing, which is profit. So it was the battle between the colonizer and the colonized in Africa, the battle between the apartheid and anti-apartheid forces in the South and economically in the North, and against the police in the North, that provided the classroom that transformed our minds and spirits as freedom fighters. So this system, the sixfold stages of mental freedom, is organic because it grows out of struggle, the way a plant grows out of the ground. And it has a natural set of developmental cycles. Myself and Bulanlela Wabogo, we tracked them. I've added one since then. I've shared it with him. He's a chemist, a martial artist, a musician, and a historian, and taught out at State, and we've known each other a long time. And so it was in our collaboration that we looked at this. He looked at Frantz Fanon and saw a pattern, and he drew his conclusions. I looked at myself because I was undergoing this transformation, and then looked at others like El Hajj, Malik El Shabazz, and others. And then I took the organization that I founded, Pan African People's Organization, I took my people through it. And that's real key. And those people are still running the organization. As I pointed out before, we still have an African-centered school, African Children's Advanced Learning Center, that a number of people who are leaders in the organization have kept going at a strong level and done other things working in the community. But the key point is that my transformation came out of an experience that was organic. That's why I call myself an organic scholar, obviously an organizer. You come out of the ground, you're literally coming out of the ground. And so it's following this process, undergoing the transformation, and then later tracking it. Because when I experienced this in the beginning, I couldn't tell you, oh, I'm going through this stage, now I'm going through that. It was an experience. But over time, you could stand back and see it. Malcolm at his death couldn't tell you what those stages were. He could tell you markers. I've talked about that before, philosophical change and others. But had he lived long enough, he would have been able to, because he underwent that transformation in depth. And it's really the key to your success. And by the way, it's not just movements, it's your health. You know what I mean? This is what really puts you on a path of health, because there's a lot of internal discord that a lot of us have. I know Black people who will say that they have trouble dealing with having quiet. They have trouble because there's internal discord. One of our first viewers, when the show first started, talked about feeling broken. And I could understand that, because it's a system that's trying in every way to break you and to give you that feeling. And so it's this system of transformation combined with struggle, because get this straight, it doesn't operate on its own, but it's in the context of trying to change the conditions that have us under the heel of oppression. It's that combination that gives us this internal fortitude, this internal self-knowledge, self-respect and self-love, and internal peace. And please believe me, you can be in the midst of oppression and be peaceful. And that's good for your health. You hear me? I'm 82, no high blood pressure, no stress, you know what I mean? No diabetes, no prostate cancer, none of that. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, because if you're living in a place that's polluted, that may happen to you. If you can get out, get out. But, we're in environmental zones that kill us, so that ain't got nothing to do with your attitude. That's got to do with your condition. So it ain't all about attitude, but the attitude is a part of it. And as you think, so you are. So it contributes to that. So these battlefields were really the basis for the transformational process occurring. And it was because of the conditions of the time where power was shifting that it was possible for these battles to not only occur, but be successful or for you to come out alive, you know, though all of us didn't. So Cabral made the point that the liberation movement requires a return to the source. And basically, the source is in the sixfold stages is your people, both past, it's your history and your culture, and your people right now, the people who make up the mass of Black folks in this case, the mass of African people. That's your source, along with your history and your past, and it's summarized in your culture. And so it's these things that we discover in the course of struggle, we draw from, and we become strong through merging ourselves in it. It's everyday Black folks that woke most of us up, woke me up. I know Kwame Ture said the same thing of his own experience. Every day Black folks. Norman Brown, I always testify to Norman Brown. Norman Brown's a cab driver, comes from Zora Neale Hurston's town, the first all-Black town. He's the one that woke me up, Norman. Norman's 2 years older than me, a little guy. You'll see him on this show. Very smart. He was my vice chair in corps. And is over eating some chicken at Virginia's restaurant that fed us for 5 years free, 2 meals, because we were full-time organizers. We organized 19, 20 hours a day for 9 years, you know. And it's over eating some chicken. And he was telling me what he was eating, that he opened my eyes and I underwent an awakening, a transformation. It came from a brother who came from an experience where in his whole life, he hadn't seen a white person until he was 18 years old. He was in an all-Black town and then moved to New York and got New Yorkized, you know, with all that political consciousness. And it's here I am, a law school student, second year of law school, and Norman Brown is breaking down how the system's working, which my father had been telling me forever, but it flew over my head and I underwent an awakening. That's organic, baby. And that was both mind-blowing. It was like my first experience of mental freedom when I thought I was free. My mind was on remote control, but I was thinking my own thoughts, but I was thinking somebody else's and didn't know it. So on the one hand, it was the light of freedom. With a little light, it felt good. On the other hand, it was embarrassing. I'm supposed to be free. I'm supposed to be smart. I'm supposed to be, because my favorite saying was, I know. You know, up till 29, that was my favorite saying. I know, yeah. Well, this was a rude awakening. I didn't know. And what did I not know? My enemy? Didn't know myself. And that was my journey for awakening. It took me on these sixfold stages to mental freedom. And what did people say who were around me? Some of them said, what happened to him? Some of them would say, he's crazy. Because you see, in the world of the blind, the one who's got one eye, he's treated as abnormal, or she, you know what I mean? And so you're crazy when you're sane. And it's vice versa, you know, the other way around. And so, yeah, so that's what some people thought, because suddenly, you know, I'm talking this Black stuff. Suddenly, I'm questioning things I never questioned before, you know? And so that was a part of the sixfold stages to mental freedom. The webinar that we're proposing, and I think we got about 26 people that have signed up so far. We need a minimum of 40. It's for the experience, because I can describe this all day long. You ain't getting it unless you've gone through it. This is an experience. And that's why I don't do theory. It's another reason I don't do theory. That's an abstraction. Half right, half wrong. My stuff walks. It's got to work. In battles, you can't have no theory about, oh, if I do this, this might work. Hey, your enemy's going to knock you out. I'm a martial artist. You know what I mean? You ain't got no theory on how you take somebody down. You practice it. somebody come at you, you might have to make another move, but you basically know the moves. That's key. Huh? It works. I'm in a workable system. I got to have a master who's good at fighting. Fine for the theory. It looks pretty, but in a fight, can you win? That's the rule. You hear me? And in sixfold stages to mental freedom, this works. It produced a Malcolm X. It produced an Amilcar Cabral. It produced an Asante Shakur. When I say it produced, they did the work. You hear me? And as a result, they were able to get results. So Amilcar Cabral, his most important strategy in the liberation of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, he was born in Guinea-Bissau, but his parents were from Cape Verde. And Cape Verdeans very brainwashed because they've been assimilated. They think they're Portuguese. Cabral did for a long time. And so his main strategy in the armed struggle for PAIGC, Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, main strategy, aside from the war strategy, was to create a group of organizers who would become leaders who had internalized this transformational process. And the key objective he was trying to achieve was to shape organizers who loved their people. That was the key thing. Who could follow the truth. And if they got some power, wouldn't abuse it. That was his key objective. That was something he had achieved through his own transformation. He was trying to reproduce that. And so he was trying to cleanse the mindset of those who he was training, many who were people with a high school education or less. And so that was the group, because Portugal trained very few people at the college level. So he was basically training them in the skills needed to run a country. But he was worried that they could join the elite that had emerged in too many parts of Africa and other parts of the world, where they were out to control the people and use the people to rip them off. And so that was the project of the sixfold stages to mental freedom. And he always said, this transformational process is not completed until you join the struggle. And that was true for us. In fact, our awakening occurred in the midst of struggle. Cabral started in a study group. Our study group was battle. And then it encouraged us to hit the books, which is hard to do when you're in the middle of a struggle. So there were two things then we had to draw from in the sixfold stages for mental freedom for the transformation of consciousness. One was the strength of our people, embedded in our historical past and our people's current culture. That was a twofold process. One was the past, one was the present, drawing from both. And that's why you see on this show, it's not just African history, it's African American. It's not just African culture, it's African American. Because that's the reality for you, or whatever your reality is. If you live on the continent, in the Caribbean, whatever, if you're drawn from Africa and you live in the Caribbean, then it's, applying it to your reality. But it's both, it's not one. And it's internalizing the best from Africa's past into your present and discarding what's negative in both your own and in the African reality. So get this. This is an organic system. It has a developmental process. It has stages that people go through. I'm not going through all these stages today. I'll touch on the first one. But that's the developmental process. And wherever you are, it is a system for you getting to the next level. You being able to transform yourself because at least you know the pattern. And that pattern helps you out. It's like working out. You got to know how to use that equipment right so that it has the proper effect on your body. And it's the same thing with transformation. If you understand the stages and levels, then you have a better idea of what you can do to work on yourself. It's like, as I said before, it's a garden. And so you got to work on the weeds. And you don't want to be using all of this stuff that you spray on plants that causes cancer and poisons the food chain, animals and other things, you know? And it's the same thing in an awakening process. You can systematize it when you understand the system. And so I'll get into the first stage by addressing, first of all, one of the big weaknesses or ghost of slavery that we know about and that we need to expunge or remove. This was described by Carter G. Woodson. He's referring to students, but this applies to the people as a whole. And he makes this comment, or he made this comment. He said, to handicap a student, and I would just say a people for life, by teaching him or her that their face is a curse, and their struggle to change their condition is hopeless, is the worst kind of lynching. It kills one's aspiration and dooms him or her to vagabondage and crime, to poverty or crime. And so he's describing this whole enslavement process, and the process continues on to this day, of defining us, in this case, Blackness, as ugly, as a curse, the curse of Ham, which drilled into some of our heads. And therefore, to say that we're in a hopeless position, there's nothing we can do to change it. And that is a part of a mentality of both colonialism and slavery of the oppressor put inside your head. So if you believe that, then you're contained. You're not going to struggle against it. So that's a ghost of slavery that we're aware of. Every day, if you're on a job, your own self-confidence is being challenged. You know, I don't care whatever it is, it's being questioned. That is the nature of how this system works, you know, to undermine you. And so again, you need to have a sense of self-knowledge and self-respect and self-love so that you can rise above that, and so that it doesn't tear you down. You can do whatever you want to resist it, but the main thing is you don't accept it. And part of that is in the internalization of the system's oppression. It gets us into a position when we've internalized it where we're not looking at things from our own standpoint. We're looking at it from the standpoint of others, the standpoint of whites, or the standpoint of blacks, or whoever it is that supports the system. And it's telling you you're wrong to stand up. You're crazy. There's nothing can be accomplished by this, you know? So it's this self-confidence that you have through your own self-knowledge, self-respect, and self-love that enables you to transcend this. And you get to a point where you don't give 2 cents about what anybody thinks about you, black or white, if they're wrong. If they're right, you should care. But if they're wrong, the hell with it. That's my attitude. I don't care 2 cents what somebody thinks if they're wrong. If they're right, I'm going to take corrective action. But if they're wrong, I don't care what the color is. You know, life ain't no popularity contest. You know what I mean? It's about doing right. And right isn't always popular. In fact, in this country, it rarely is, you know? So this internalization of the ghost of slavery, fear, which I've talked about before, is a controlling element, you know? And it's a myth. Fear. You're taught fear. You're not born with it. And it's the greatest hindrance to your growth. And liberation movements, one of the first things they throw off is fear. You see all these young people out there fighting against police violence. A lot of guts and a lot of sisters. And that picture of one sister standing up to a whole phalanx of police with her dignified self. You know what I mean? That's a sense of power. That's a sense of courage. You know what I mean? Fear is an illusion. It ties you up. It causes you stress. It causes you high blood pressure. When you're awake, you may not want to do this, but you're going to find that you're instilling that on your oppressor. You may not be your intention, but that's what's going to happen because those who are trying to instill it have the greatest amount inside of them. You know, in order to create something like that, you have to have it inside yourself. And one of the greatest fears that whites have is that blacks will do to them what they've done to us. And that generally isn't our predisposition, but that's their fear, you know. But fear is a myth. So these are things that we have to cough up, and fear isn't just caused by slavery. We're fear of losing a job, fear of losing approval, you know, fear of all kinds, you know what I mean? Later for that, you know, it's a myth. Be like a child, except know the consequences. A child may not know that fire will burn. They may not have fear of fire. They don't know of fire, but they don't need to fear it to know that it'll burn, you know? So these are things that in the course of struggle, as we're trying to change systems, we change ourselves and we undergo this process of rebirth and of transformation. We know that a lot of our children still have programmed in them that white is beautiful and black is ugly. And we still know the Dow test doesn't do too well in the black community. We know that. So don't deny that the lingering ghost of slavery isn't still there in that. And black on black violence. My wife keeps count, you know, in Oakland. I mean, every day somebody's getting killed. Some bodies, you hear me? All over the country. And yes, it was caused by putting drugs in the community. It was caused by breaking up families, breaking up communities, putting people in a hopeless position, you know, where they don't see a future in their lives, you know. But the fact is, underneath that is also a view of nothingness that some of us have about the value of a black life. It ain't nothing. You hear me? When that's the most precious thing on this planet, a life, for us, a human life. And so to erase that, it isn't just a physical being you're erasing. You're erasing the potential, the creativity, everything that human being could do and could be. And so that's a part of this ghost that we need to work on. And violence in the black community ain't all attributed to slavery, you know. So that's the other thing to get straight about that, because the level of violence now is far greater than anything we experienced when we came off the plantation. You know what I mean? Some of these are external forces that have intervened, drugs being one of them, but only one of them. Being written out of the society and not seeing yourself having a future is another, you know. And this tendency too often to get violent with each other when we could talk. And it's a shame that we need to have programs to teach us how to do that. But if that's what we need, then do it. You know what I mean? So the key thing that I want to stress in terms of the stages of awakening or the sleep stage that we come out of, there are two first stages in the sixfold stages to mental freedom. One is assimilation. The other one is Black identity in this country, and it would be African identity on the continent, and it would be Jamaican or whatever the national identity is of an island culture, you know. Blacks come out of one of these two when it comes to the first stage. We charted this, there is no question about it. A minority come out of the assimilationist stage. I came out of that. Cabral came out of that. Malcolm came out of that. But a majority of our people come out of this Black identity stage. King came out of that. The brother that woke me up, Norman Brown, he came out of that. You hear me? So it depends on your life experience, which one of these takes place. And in the case of Cabral, coming out of the Portuguese colonial context, Um, his first step to freeing his mind came through study group that they formed, an African study group, in which you had many of the leaders of what would become the liberation movements in Mozambique and Angola taking part. And they called themselves Cabral's generation. And part of Cabral's awakening came through his plunge into studying his past, his African past. But part of it came through understanding that the colonial project of the Portuguese, and I should point out, the project of whites in this country was very similar, was the colonial project of assimilation. But that was not for the masses. That was for a tiny elite, because the Portuguese were very, poverty stricken when it came to their economy. They had a weak economy. So they couldn't do the amount of miseducation that the British or the French could do. So it's very little. But the few who went through that process, and Cabral was one of them, they were being trained to be an elite that would become the black colonizers, so to speak. They would be given a miseducation, mind transplant, Portuguese. Cabral came into that with one being descended from Cape Verde. And then their job is to go back and control the people. In the United States, and I'm repolishing chapter 11 in my book on Sev. I've done 608, sometimes I tell you 614, that I'm doing cut and paste. This is really hard. Writing is rewriting, and this rewriting stuff, I enjoy all of it, but it's not the most creative part. But right now I'm dealing with the Mohawk Conference, and I'm setting up this 11 chapter because this book is being written like a novel, and then at the same time exploring the mastery system. And so in this one, I'm dealing with the Mohawk Conference held in the end of the 19th century in New York, a place called Mohawk. And there had been 6 of these conferences on Native Americans before then. What to do with them, who were 10% of what was left, because they had killed off 90%. And then there were 2 on the African American. And all I'm going to say about this particular conference is this: their project of assimilation was to create 2 groups of blacks that they saw could be the controlling elements for blacks. Now, it becomes much more complex later. But at the level of the Mohawk Conference in the 1890s, where this is post-Reconstruction, and blacks are being ground to death by the Klan, and they're facing sharecropping and everything else, they wanted to create 2 groups. One was the group of teachers and professors, but mainly teachers, and the other was preachers. And the goal of these 2 was to present the teachings that would contain the black masses. And the black masses, they needed to be contained, as they viewed it, as workers. Now, the ones who are being trained as the elite in Portugal or by France or Britain, they eventually would be trained to be the leaders of African nations, to manage black labor, to transfer the wealth of that labor back to Europe. And I don't have time to go and give you examples of how this worked, but that was essentially the project. And Europe, I've made this point before, Europe was very successful with the missionary project of creating a black middle class. All right. But the problem for the Europeans in America in the 1890s was that blacks proved to be very hard to manage. We wanted 40 acres and a mule. We wanted our own homesteads where we could raise our families. Black men were protective of their women and did not want them in the grasp of white men, and would not stand for any of them coming in telling their children or their wives to do anything. So we were restive and we were rebellious. from 1865 into turn of the 20th century. And so this exercise called the Mohawk Conference was about containment, how to contain the Black masses. So the assimilation was to, through Hampton, Tuskegee, and others, to train up Black teachers and Black preachers. And the person who was the architect of this was a man named General Armstrong, who was a Civil War general and founder of Hampton, the trainer of Booker T. Washington. And at this conference, no Blacks were allowed to attend. And when asked why, they said, when a doctor is getting ready to operate on a patient, they don't have the patient present. Yeah, especially when the patient's Black and they are proposing a lobotomy. And where in the world the patient's going for that. They are proposing a system of miseducation that is designed to lead to servility and subordination. This was the project. And I'm going to tell you, this project failed. And that's what you don't get, because we're forever. We don't know a victory when we have one, because we don't study our own history. Because they had a problem. And this was the problem, because they're creating a new Black middle class, very small, but teachers and preachers. And for a long time, that's about all Black people could do: teach, preach, or undertaker. You know what I mean? Or doing something else you didn't want to do. And so the project failed. Why? Because Blacks were then transitioning into what you don't think. See, you think we were brainwashed, not all of you, because you heard enough of me to say this, and some of you have done your homework and know better. But Blacks were not Christians during slavery. They were making the decision now to embrace what they called Christianity, but it was voodoo. They were taking the voodoo they practiced for 249 years in plantation slavery and sticking it up under the Black church. And it was a 97% decision. That's Black folks for you. We're 97%ers. You hear me? 97% of Black people supported the Montgomery bus boycott. Until the families were unraveled, 97% of Blacks married to Blacks, 75% two-parent household. And now still, it's 86% of brothers marry sisters and 93% of sisters marry brothers. I always say you mark our nationalism by our relationship rates. We like each other in spite of having issues. We sure do. And the reason is we like our mamas. Guess what? You hear me? So the key point is assimilation in the beginning of this project was to create an elite group that could control the masses who were on remote control. The problem was the masses weren't going for it. And this was through industrial education. But I would say that their classical education, later, those that taught that, it was also for the same purpose from the white standpoint, not necessarily from the Black standpoint. So this was frustrated because Blacks were creating their own religious institution under what's called freedom. They had already had it under plantation slavery. It wasn't really religion, it was a spirit system. They dropped it into what they called the Black church. And they had their own leaders. And so the objective of creating preachers was to create a new kind of preacher that would come from the white boys' book. But Blacks weren't coming from a book. And some of us to this day will read the book, but there's something else that drives us, which is the spirit, baby. One of my specialties is Black church. The other one is the Black family. The other one is Black music, along with history and philosophy of a lot of different areas, and politics. It's a specialty of mine. And as an organizer, you can't be an organizer in the Black community unless you can also fit into organizing in the Black church. And movements that haven't done it have made big, fat mistakes. I'm not going to list them because it's going to sound like I'm putting down a movement. But a big, fat mistake, since it's an institution you own. Yeah, it's got all kinds of problems. But the fact of the matter is, they were trying through this Mohawk conference to create a new kind of religious leadership because the kind we had was addressing our interests. You hear me? The other problem that they were trying to address was creating a new type of elder because we had our own institution of elderhood carried from Africa. We still have it. It's been weakened by the drug trade. But that's the institution of wisdom in our community. One reason why some bad choices are being made, I know some people don't want to hear this, on COVID is because our youth, some of them, not all, but some of them are not listening to their elders anymore. And they're not going on wisdom. They're going on the internet. On, well, they came up with this vaccine too quick. How do you know what's too quick? You a scientist? You know what I mean? Huh? Who's dying the most? The people that ain't got the shots. And I understand why people have responded to this, Tuskegee and a whole bunch of other stuff. I understand that. You should be suspicious. But then we take a polio vaccine, we take a vaccine for almost everything, but this one here is killing us at a greater rate than just about anybody else, and you ain't taking it. Africa can't get the vaccine. They want it. And we're running up here talking about it's a conspiracy. Yeah, the conspiracy is ignorance. As a brother I used to work out with at the Y, who's blind, you know what I mean? He said, common sense ain't so common anymore. It used to be. You know what I mean? Huh? We got to count on Black people always making the smart decision. The majority of us still do. You know? So when we're looking at this, the awakening process that our people go through, this assimilation process, was being set up for control. But the people had their own systems, and they did not accept control. They had their own elders giving them advice. And so they could try, because another project of the Mohawk Conference was to create new elders. You can't do that. You try all you want, ain't going to work. And what really trumped, I hate to use that term, but what really trumped them was that the system that the white boy was setting up, his assimilation, was an elite system. But the grassroots, we have an African system of everybody has a say-so. That's called African democracy. That's consensus. So even when our elders gave advice, we always would go back and make the decision as a group. That was something we carried out of Africa. Did you know that? Leaders, and our real definition of leadership is, as King said, I didn't start the Montgomery bus boycott. When the people called on me, I stepped forward as a spokesperson for the people. That's what a real leader is in the context of African and African American culture. And so this was the project of assimilation. And I'm not going to say it completely failed in that, we have produced over time through college education, not just Black colleges now, a Black middle class. And unfortunately, the majority of that Black middle class has looked out for itself and not its people. And that was one of Du Bois's great disappointments when he called for the talented 10th to lead our people. He realized the only place they were ready to lead was their own personal enrichment, much like what Africa faced with independence leaders, some of whom looked only at their pocketbook. But then there are others who came out of this group who betrayed that position of being a middleman, oatmeal man, or a servant for the system, and were servants for the people. And, the left, they call this class suicide. They committed class suicide as they became one with the people. And so it's not just a middle class, it's a question of the mentality of the people who are in it. So the sixfold stages to mental freedom is a system, provides a system for de-assimilation. Taking people who have identified themselves either as white or, in my case, thinking white and transforming their mindset. Cabral, when he underwent his transformation through a study group, he said, "We decided to be African." You say, that's funny. You're African already. What do you have to decide that? It's a consciousness, a transformation of consciousness. So it is this that this system addresses. And for those who are in the state of Black identity, it evens out the contradictions, because in Black identity, the biggest weakness is a lack of historical memory. But I always say this: the highly developed Black person who has Black identity and the highly developed African-centered person, whether they came through their African-centeredness through de-assimilation or through Black identity, the highest level of the person who identifies with Black is equal to the highest level of the African-centered person, except that this Black person lacks a historical memory, and that is a weakness, without a question. But if they have a deep sense of pride in their Blackness, a love for themselves, that will usually carry them through. It would be better if they were able to do the plunge into their roots to get the deeper knowledge. That would give them more tools in their life. But this is the strength of this Black culture. It was Black culture that got me to begin to think about being African. It was Black culture. That came out of my family. It was European culture through nothing but teachers that were white through law school, on every level, that took me out of my consciousness. But then it was my people that brought me back, and then to appreciate what my parents had been telling me, particularly my father. Asanta Shakur had an insight when she was in the Black Panther Party, and we know she's in exile in Cuba. They have a reward, $1 million, to try and get her back. And the Cubans won't give her back. She was one of the great leaders in the Black Panther Party. And she made this comment about the Black Panthers. But this isn't a knock on the Panthers. This is true of a lot of our groups. She said that in the Black Panther Party, they knew more about and were taught more about Mao and Marx than about Nat Turner or Harriet Tubman. Meaning, political education may have been all right, but if you exclude your own history and your own culture, you're going to be in trouble when it comes to moving for liberation. And the Panthers had a particular strength and a particular weakness. And their strength was they got a lot of brothers and sisters, especially brothers off the street. That was a great strength. Brothers off the street, they were prepared to fight. Brothers off the street, they brought a lot of skills and a lot of talents, but they also brought an inclination towards what's called in political language lumpen behavior, Lumpen. Most of you listening to this show know what it is: criminal behavior, petty crime, whatever. Someone like Eldridge Cleaver brought in serious lumpen behavior because he was an unreformed rapist. And when he wrote Soul on Ice, that was a rapist manual. He was into beating women and having sex with them. This is after he gets out of prison and becomes the primary leader of the Black Panther Party when Huey's in prison. And Bobby Seale, who was one of their best organizers, didn't have the influence at that point that Eldridge had. So Bobby, good organizer, good man, and deserves his due. He deserves a great deal of due, because Breakfast for Children program, a whole lot of other things, that was Bobby Seale. Good organizer, good speaker too. So one of the problems the Panthers had was that when they got in a lot of the lumpen, They didn't have a process for transforming them. The Nation of Islam did, even though they had their issues. If you watch the show we did on the assassination of Malcolm, you can see some of those. It wasn't all pretty. But the fact is, they had a transformational process. It was not as complete as Malcolm's because theirs was religious. Malcolm's was historical, political, social, spiritual, philosophical. His was total. But that was one that he underwent through his process of transformation in prison. And he wasn't aware that these two could collide. That was just his way of following the truth. So the Panthers would have been stronger, much stronger, if they had this transformational process. Now, some in the Panthers went through it. Fred Hampton, Assata Shakur, and a number of others. D.C., Donald Cox, who came out of San Francisco Corps, Field Marshal, Black Panther Party. There were a number that did. And a lot on the East Coast had more grounding in culture than on the West Coast, African and African-American culture. And some on the West Coast did as well. Emory Douglas, very conscious brother, So this transformational process is necessary for any group's success. But don't think that this is just something for groups. It's good for the person because the transformational process is an individual experience. It's a personal experience. And so in undergoing that, it is the real basis for you achieving true internal freedom. It's a key. So in conclusion, when a people experience a system of oppression that leaves them feeling broken, then we need systems that help us put ourselves back together. The lingering ghost, whether it be of slavery or the oppression that we're facing right now, that can take its form of abuse in various forms, including sexual abuse, violence, these have to be broken. And this is a process for that, of creating wholeness through transcending the mud of oppression, rising to a higher level, freeing our minds, our spirits, our families, our communities, the nation that is our nation, and using this as a part of the process for transforming society. So we have to bring up the ghosts that are hidden in our subconscious, to spit it out. We have to reach a point where we really love ourselves. And I know many listening to this show already have that. But the point is, we all have areas we need to work on. But for our people, this is crucial, tied to movements for transformation on whatever level that may be, based on your interests, based on your skills, because we all have different fights to fight on different levels. But it's got to transcend just the person to something bigger than ourselves. And that's where real transformation comes. So I hope you got something out of this. This is an experience. I want to stress that the webinar is crucial for this because that's going to be a 12-month process. I'm going to have people that I took through this process have been using this in their lives for 40, 45 years. And they've used it also in their families. They've used it personally. They've used it in prisons. They've used it in various places. And so they bring in a skill set. And so when we do this transformational training, we're doing it for a year, twice a month, a couple hours each time in the month, so that we can get deep down inside of you. And the reason that I'm bringing on other people, so we can break people down into smaller groups so you can interact. But this is one of the main reasons for doing this show, because the information, it may be useful for you, but the transformational system is the key thing. And when this book is finished on SEBA, which is dealing with the apprenticeship system that deals with mastery, then we'll be getting into how you not only deal with the transformation of identity, but how you master your destiny, which are your gifts. And some of you are in the process of doing that. Some are in the process of discovering it, wherever you are. We have maintained in our culture the system of mastering the masters. So that's another story for another time. So I hope you got something out of this. And send by way of your comments under this show any suggestions you have for improving this show, any suggestions that you have for topics, any things you'd like to see, put them out there, and we'll see. That's the way we can improve the show. And for sisters, you got ideas for more interesting topics or more relevant topics for you. What are those? Put those out there. So we want to take this to a higher level. And if any of you have skills that you want to contribute, computer skills or technical skills, let me know. We could use help. You know what I mean? So that's it. Hotep. Let's see what people have here. Let me see if there's a lot of nice comments here about thank you, and people are making observations as they listen, which are interesting. So I think people can see those themselves. So I want to see if there are any questions. So let me get in here. Rob James, a black man walking in with a mask going into Bank of America. Sure, coronavirus. Any links for Dr. Tashaka drawing Civil War parallels to our current battle against Trump and white insecurity? Yeah, go to the show that is entitled Black Power in the Civil War, something about how blacks won the Civil War. I retitled that from what it was titled before, and that has historical footage. That is, my filmmaker brought in a lot of historical shots of Civil War veterans and stuff like that, and it does a comparison between the Civil War and the current battle against Trump. It predicted how Trump would be defeated, and it went that way. Robin, I don't use the term white supremacy either. I call it white oppressionists or white oppressors, because all they did or do is try to keep us down and get in our way. Yeah. Now, I'm not knocking people who use white supremacy. I understand the context. I'm just simply saying that there are better ways to describe what they're doing. Rob James, 2000 to 2021. Trust me, I'm going through a pandemic. I understand. I get you, brother. Let's see if there's any more here. Rob James again. I asked someone, when will African Americans get reparations? They told me, when you go to heaven. That's pretty good. Reparations are generally given when when those that are in need of it have the power to get it. And I think that's usually how it goes. In the case of the Jews, they didn't have the power to get it, but their allies, the Americans and the Europeans, they did, so they could put the pressure on Germany. So they had to give it up. And in the case of the Japanese, they got paltry reparations, 25,000 for those who were still alive, which was a joke because most of them had died by the time they decided to give them $25,000, which was a pure joke. Sohandra Henderson, she's repeating a comment made. They put in dehumanizing conditions. Quit saying they dehumanized us. A powerful way to look at that situation. No, it's true, because if you look at the condition of Blacks who come out of enslavement, you'll see that the greatest amount of humanism is expressed at that point when Blacks have literally nothing materially, and yet they'll give up anything they have to help another Black person. Literally, that's the case, you know. And they came out with scars. I'm not saying that we came through this and we were supermen and nothing wrong. No, we came out with scars. But I was reading Naeem Akbar's book on the breaking chains of psychological slavery, and I made this comment earlier that he made the point that we came out of slavery normal. That's the point. He's a psychologist, so he's drawing those observations. And then I made the comment that actually at a higher level of humanity than the whites. And you could say that's not hard since the savagery that they practice, but it is a big statement, because most people who go through this experience, spirits are broken. Most people, you go through this horrendous experience, they're taken down. We rose up. We had scars. I don't want to deny those scars, but the strengths were far greater than those scars. And the greatest strength came from humanism. And humanism is like at the core of African culture. It's our DNA. It's our cellular memory. You didn't need DNA or cellular memory. You came here with that, And so that was sharing. You know what I mean? Sharing whatever it was to sustain life. That's why Blacks who could have their families torn apart could be put back together, because it was an extended family community that adopted them and loved them. And it's only with the drug crisis that we're seeing for the first time some young people who have never experienced love. That happened with a few before. But by and large, that was in ready supply, love. And so that's at the heart of our culture, So it's not only a good way to look at it, it's the way it was. And by the way, don't forget, I quote this many times before, Zora Neale Hurston's statement, that the closer to slavery you get, the more African we were. Huh? Get that one. Get that one. Get another one. While the average life expectancy of Blacks was about 50 years, and many dying before that, some dying after that, we had the longest living Africans during slavery, 123 years old, 126 years old. What about that? How did that happen? They were African, baby. Like, I take my castor oil every morning. You all know that's an old folks remedy. That's a cleansing system. Castor oil tastes nasty. I don't care. If it's cleaning my system out, I'll take nasty. You know what I mean? My mother had us on castor oil for 18 years. And my mother never gained or lost a pound until, the end of her life, where she was paralyzed, but, for a year or so. But up to that, she was in great health, and she passed that on to us. You know what I mean? Our oatmeal, that old nasty stuff. I eat it. Put honey on it. Put bananas on it. Dress it up. And 30-minute oatmeal, not that 2-minute stuff. You know what I mean? Complex carbohydrate. It's good for you for a whole lot of things, So those all come from enslavement. And by the way, all kinds of, every family has got their own recipes, herbal and others for healing, you know? So you root that, that's back then, you know? We had different views, you know? Rob James, maybe it's a mental illness called PDSD, post-traumatic slave syndrome, because I consider myself a soldier. Yeah. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. Okay, we got a lot of inner comments here. Okay, note that my computer person put up the address for Alton's business. It's Talios, Talios coffee shop in San Francisco, Bayview, Hunters Point. And he has his own special brew of coffee. It is very special. Very special. And a really nice brother. Really nice. Brilliant and nice. You know. Let's see if there's anything else here. If there's anything else here. Okay. See if there's any views on the bottom. Black Voltron Reloaded. Excellent broadcast today, the Dr. Obutashaka show. This show has definitely helped me to raise my Black consciousness. And then on the bottom, castor oil. Okay, that's it. Hope you got something out of this. Send me your comments because we're taking the show to another level. You know, so Hotep, I've enjoyed it.